Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Continuing Professional Education Services Hot Topic series. And Happy New Year. I think it's the 16th. I think I can probably stop saying Happy New Year now, and
Yes.
probably the way things go, we can start saying Merry Christmas because it'll be here as soon as we know it. I'm Phil Brilliant. I am a board member of Continuing Professional Education Services. Along with me is the chairman of the board, Dr. George Berkowitz, and the executive director, Julia Masago, is somewhere in the Hollywood squares of my computer right now. And we're going to jump in. I want to do a quick introduction, however, and just, of course, to remind you that we do have a lot of educational programs coming up. Check our website at CPESNJ.com. But this morning, we're going to talk about what the heck is going to happen in 2025 in New Jersey, talk about business, talk about the environment, and, to me, no better person than I think I could say my friend. We've actually drank together, partied together, smoked cigars together. And Tony's seen me walk around the Rutgers parking lot at football tailgate with no shirt on, but that'll be something we won't talk about again.
Memorable. It was memorable, Phil.
It was memorable. It was memorable, yeah. And I'm surprised that Renee is still part of your life anyway. But with that said, I always give the same introduction when I give Tony. Tony is the president of CIANJ, the CEO and the publisher of Commerce Magazine. And when you introduce and you say things like that, people think this is a guy who basically has no idea what we do in the industry as environmental consultants, no idea what we do as far as business goes. But he's a graduate of NJDEP, a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. He has been a DEP employee. He has been a consultant. He has been part of regulatory affairs of the Chemical Council, my favorite, the National Lime Association, and now as the president of CIANJ, really is a voice in Trenton as well as a voice for all businesses throughout New Jersey. And so it is my pleasure to have Tony with me this morning as we talk about what's going to happen in 2025, and we'll hit upon the gubernatorial race also. So good morning, Tony.
Hey, good morning, Phil, George, Jules, and everybody. And I always say Happy New Year, at least through the end of January. So hopefully everybody had a good holiday season. And I think this is my third or fourth year doing this. And I always enjoy it, Phil, because I always like when it's a new year, right? It's almost like when you were in school and you got fresh supplies and notebooks and you're anticipating what's going to happen. This year in 2025 is interesting for all of us, and especially if you're a political junkie, because we just had a presidential election. We're going to have President-elect Trump be sworn in next week, right? Lee Zeldin, who's his EPA candidate, actually is going to have a congressional hearing this morning at 10 o'clock. What's that dynamic going to be like? But when you bring it back to New Jersey, it's Governor Murphy's last year. It's a transition year, a legacy year. I've been doing this for like 25 years now, and I always remember the last year in any administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is you got to watch what their legacy issues are, right? Good or bad. What are the issues that matter to them? And I could talk about, I was at the governor's State of the State address on Tuesday, and I'll talk about some of the environmental issues that he talked about. But it's interesting because, again, it's his last year. He's been governor now, it'll be 8 years. And then we have a governor's race. And I could talk, Phil, if it's okay with you. I'm a numbers guy. I'm always fascinated with the voter turnout, and I've looked at all the elections, right? So can I go right into it, Phil?
But actually, I want to say something first. I will tell you, I was with Governor Murphy on Monday night because at the Rutgers basketball games, he sits in front of me. And so I asked him, I said, hey, what are you going to talk about tomorrow? Give me a prelim. And, Tammy started laughing next to him, and he goes, you got to tune in. And I made a comment. I'm like, some of us have to work during the day, and he made me chuckle a little. He says, we've talked about actually moving it to night. He goes, but then you'll have people who won't come down during the day to Trenton. And I kind of looked at him, and she kind of chuckled a little. And I said, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's all about the joint legislature, right? The Senate.
Yes, yeah.
So
it's all about the showcase. So let's jump right into it. Go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's important too, because people have always asked me, the difference between a presidential election and a governor's election. And what I'm about to say is factual, right? I've looked at it through the years. The turnout in November of last year was actually less than in 2020, which kind of surprised me. In 2020, it was up to about 85%. It dropped to about 62%. So it was pretty interesting that, given all the focus and the animosity and the division in the country, I thought the voter turnout in New Jersey, would be higher. But if you think about New Jersey in a whole, it's 9.5 million people. We have 6 million registered voters. The Democrats have about 2 million registered Democrats. Republicans just over 1.1 million, and then the rest are all unaffiliated. And what was interesting is, 62% came out. What happens is New Jersey and Virginia, after a presidential election, were the only two states that elect the governor. So the focus is always going to be the new president. 4 years ago was Joe Biden. Now it's going to be President-elect Trump again. And what happens in November, I think a lot of people see it as a test of the current administration. How are they doing? Are they doing well for business and people or not? So I think, right, it's to be determined, right? This come November, we have a huge field, which we'll talk about in terms of the governor's race. But it's going to be interesting to see if how President Trump's 8 and 9 months going to impact our elections here in New Jersey. So in addition to electing the governor, we also going to elect our assembly. So I think it's an important point to make that the voter turnout in non-presidential in governor's elections is usually about less than half. So it's usually about 4 out of 10. So think about that. Always fascinates me that 6 people decide to stay home and not weigh in on who your governor is, but maybe 5 or 6 show up for the presidential election. So I'm always fascinated on how to get people out to vote. And if you think about how we've evolved since 2020, right? It's not an election day anymore. It's an election season, right? You have early vote and you have vote by mail. So it's just interesting that despite all of that, for whatever reason, apathy or whatever, it's just people aren't coming out to vote. So I think it's a safe bet to say come November, whoever wins the governor's race, you're looking at maybe less than half of a voter turnout. So just wanted to make that point, Phil. Because
and by the way, it is very interesting, and I'm there with you because I think you have, if you really did a poll, okay, all the people who complain about government is probably more than the people who vote for government. It's kind of interesting, and you're right, because I do think that you look at the voter turnout, and as much as there was a lot of talk about the outcome and how the numbers changed in New Jersey, Republican versus Democrat, you still didn't see that big number of people voting for the president.
Right. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty interesting. So let me go to the state of the state, because that was fresh on everybody's mind. Phil just teed it up nicely. The governor delivered a state of the state, about an hour presentation, and more or less for folks, it's more or less his priorities that he'd like to see for the year. He's going to need the legislature to help him on a few of them. The big thing for us in the business community is the budget, which will probably come next month, right? His final budget talk and presentation. But bringing it back to the environment, I mean, he basically made a point to say he'd like to see Senator Smith and some of the folks in the legislature push the clean energy goals of 2035. And I can tell you that energy is an important topic at the national level, at the state level. It's something that's going to be front and center for a lot of our companies, and we represent the utilities, we represent manufacturers and hospitals. And, I talk to them all the time. Energy costs are there. It's in front of them. And, this big push to go to wind and solar, what does that mean? Clean energy goals, electric car mandates. I could talk about the California truck mandate. There's no question in my mind. I'm sure it'll come up today in Lee Zeldin's hearing is what his views are on climate change and, energy, drill, baby, drill, right? It's one of those things. And then the governor literally on Tuesday said, hey, we got to push through legislation to say clean energy goals by 2035. It's not that far away. It's 10 years away.
Yeah, 10 years away.
10 years away. And if you really think about how big of a bite of that apple comes out, I mean, and again, looking through the legislative calendar, if they were to do something legislatively in his final year, that'll be incredible. It's going to be a push and a tug. It's going to be a fight, but I think, stay tuned, because energy, both at the national level and the state level, is where that rub is going to be, right? So the tendency is, right, when President-elect Trump got elected, we all seen it. It's the Doji thing, right? Government efficiency, less regulations. Well, what happens is, for those of us that have been around long enough, things get pushed down to the states, right? Especially we're a blue state. So what does Governor Murphy do? What does the state legislature do? Right? Governor Murphy literally, I thought he handled it. He said it perfectly on Tuesday. I'll work with the Trump administration when our priorities line up, but if they don't line up, then I'll basically push back. So I think in terms of a business impact, I think we're going to want to see, what happens on the energy side. Again, more facts for everybody. Electric vehicles, if you think about it, they signed legislation last year. Now, if you own an all-electric car, you're paying a flat $250 registration fee. That's more or less your gas tax, right? Because you've been getting away without paying it. There's about 200,000 cars that are electric. And I'm not sure if it includes hybrid or not, but out of 6 million. So you could do the math. It's starting to inch up. But I could tell you, electric cars are heavier. I know a lot of our folks, and this is maybe a good opportunity to talk about a hot topic that we're working on. It's called the California Advanced Truck Program, or Clean Air Program.
Right, I was asking. Yep.
Yeah, so the DEP came out with regulations in 2021. They went through, were adopted starting this month. Car dealerships need to work with manufacturers in purchasing all electric trucks. So we're part of a coalition, and unbeknownst to, at least for us, I mean, I didn't appreciate this, but just to give you some perspective, the first challenge is, are the truck manufacturers making all electric trucks? So think about an 18-wheeler. Are they all electric? What is the cost? The cost, from what I was told, was a diesel truck 18-wheeler could be 187,000. When you go to all electric, it goes up to 500,000. So it is not. It's not cheap, and I think
it's not cheap. And the other thing too is you're also not just going home at night and plugging into your garage.
right,
I
and
mean,
that's the other.
and the infrastructure aspect of this, I don't think we're ready for.
Yeah, and so long story short, why that's important, because even though companies don't have to buy them, the dealerships have to start including them in their stock, in their fleet, and so eventually it's going to turn over. So. We formed a coalition. We're part of it, led by a bunch of trucking associations. And there is a bill that made it out of committee, which would extend the deadline for 2 years. We're not sure if it'll go through, but the hope is that, it just gives us more time. So that's, again, on energy, it's very important that we just stay vigilant, because, again, all these things are laudable in terms of, reducing carbon emissions, but then there's that cost factor, right? Wind and solar, what happens there. So
Tony, just to slide in there real quick, on that, there's the bill there. They think it'll make it through, but is the governor going to sign that? Because it doesn't necessarily, go with his, clean energy and his climate change mandate. So is this going to be something that's going to happen? How are companies going to adopt if there's a question as to if this 2 years is going to come or not?
yeah, it's a good question, Phil. And we actually met with the commissioner right before the holidays. It was a coalition meeting, and I think he appreciated where we were coming from. The answer is they're going to look at it, but they're open to working with us. Nobody really knows what the impact is until the impact is right there, right? So it took effect this month, and it's like everybody's like, wait a minute, now we got to start buying these trucks. What do we have to do? So I'm hoping that it goes through, but time will tell.
And we didn't talk about this the other day, but you made me think about two other aspects of this. One is we saw a lot at the November, December push, buy your RVs now, because you're never going to be able to buy an RV again in the state of New Jersey. Is that all kind of tied together? Is that kind of on hold now, or is that something that we're really, I mean, again, not that I'm going out to buy a recreational vehicle right now, a big, be nice to go drive across country and leave New Jersey. But anyway, but I mean, is that really all tied together in this?
I think so, Phil. I know, going back to your point about the infrastructure, I know you're going to probably start seeing more money devoted to building up that infrastructure. I could tell you, and this is like, I'm sure many of you on the call probably have friends, family, or you probably own an electric vehicle. There's that electric vehicle anxiety, right? It's that range anxiety, right? It's, can I, use my electric vehicle? Hybrid seems to be the market. At least that's where we think and we're seeing. When I talk to the car dealerships, it seems like hybrid is it. But I think, Phil, it's going to be an interesting year this year again, because what the federal new EPA is going to want to do versus what the state's going to want to do. There's a lot to cram in here in a year, but I think you
Yeah.
start seeing a lot of energy related bills. Just to give you again a flavor of what we mean by when the governor asks in his state of the state, hey, let's achieve clean energy by 2035. There was a couple of bills that were heard in committee back last spring that would modernize our grid, right? The state's going to have to assign some money. Can our grid accept the wind and the solar and the nukes and, obviously the natural gas plants? And so there's got to be an upgrade there. Then there's something called the New Jersey Clean Energy Fund or Act of 2024. It would create a clean energy certificate program where, the BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, would have to come out and, issue these certificates. So there's a lot. You talk about complexity. When you talk about energy and going from, renewable, right? It's not renewable. It's one of those things where, what is the impact on cost? How's the transmission going to work? Is it there? And I think that we're going to be very focused
Before we
on energy for sure.
And before we jump off this topic, because we're talking about energy and also climate change kind of together, is I got a bill yesterday to start signing up. And even though it's, what we say, 10 degrees outside, 18 degrees outside, to start talking about my spring cleanup. And one of the things that was on there was a surcharge for gas powered blower, which I thought was really interesting. My
Yeah.
landscapers added this onto his bill. And I know we talked about this last year, and I tried to do a little bit of research on it. Is that banned now? Are we done with gas power
No,
blowers?
there is, and that's a good point. There was a bill that was heard in committee. I think it made it out, but it didn't advance to ban gas powered leaf blowers. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's again, yeah, I know.
yeah,
Look, if you know anything about CIANJ, you got to let the market decide, right? We're not big on
right.
mandates. Let the markets decide. You're going to start seeing a lot of companies want to do the environmental sustainable thing, right? It's a factor. Are there leaf blowers going to be redesigned? I don't know. But no, the ban isn't.
Yeah, I know there are some municipalities that have banned them for noise purposes, but I was surprised to
Yeah.
see a small landscaper who put a surcharge on there. I guess he's anticipating some
Oh,
additional
we
cost into his
anticipated it,
business.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, for
which I
sure.
thought was interesting. So,
But
um,
that's a bill that was introduced, had a committee hearing on it, but it hasn't advanced. So,
um, okay, what's
no,
next on your list?
I'm gonna pivot away from energy to, people often ask me, and what on the legislative side, right? What's the priority this year? And if you've been following Senator Smith and his committee, or Senator Kennedy and on the Assembly side and his committee, plastics, 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 right? It's, recycling. I haven't seen anything like it in recent years, but I guess to Senator Smith's credit, he's kind of focused on recycling, reducing food waste and going after plastic. And I think, again, he understands the complexity of, the bills that he's trying to push through. The big one, and you've probably seen it or read about it, and again, there's a coalition of businesses that have been formed, is what's called the Extended Producer Responsibility Act. And that basically would set up a program where an organization would be developed. Anybody that manufactures a plastic product, and albeit there will be exemptions, would have to put up money into a fund. And then this fund would then be used, the money in the fund would then be used to develop a stewardship program, similar to what you've seen on the paint side, where, life of plastic, right? How much of it can be
Right.
recycled. So it's a big complex bill. I think the senator also knows it's complex. It could take years. It's moving through. I mean, he had a discussion this Monday on it, and it's a complicated bill, but I think that's front and center. I know he wants to focus on it. There's also a bill that would require more, if you're going to make a plastic product, that you have to use recycled plastic. Problem is, I talked to some of our companies, it's that there's not really a robust market that sells recycled plastic that can be reused. So a lot of logistical issues when it comes to recycling plastic, but that's front and center. I thought what was interesting is there was a bill that was heard in December called the Climate Superfund Act. And what that would do is literally mimic on the Superfund side, but for climate impact, climate change. It would target fossil fuel companies, and they would have to pay damages or money into a climate Superfund Act. It was in committee, came out, I think, and I think that's one where we're going to have to keep an eye on. That's an interesting one. We talked about energy. We talked about California truck. A couple of constitutional amendments that we've been tracking a year ago. There was something called the Green Amendment that would change our constitution, that would give citizens the right for clean air, clean water. Sounds great, but in talking to all the attorneys, and I'm not one, is, if that went through and changed our state constitution, then that means your neighbor, if he or she has a problem with you fertilizing your lawn, might make a claim to say, I have a right to a non-fertile, non-pesticide type of product. And so that got backed off. I don't know if it'll come back, but that's something that we're tracking. PFAS.
Okay.
And then Phil, we can kind of talk about some of the other stuff,
No,
but
no,
go ahead.
no, go. PFAS.
PFAS, everybody's been asking about PFAS. Complicated, thousands of chemicals, class, category. DEP's been asking a lot of our companies to monitor and submit information. Senator Greenstein, who's the vice chair of the committee, introduced some bills a few years ago. They've kind of made their way through. I haven't seen it come back, but that's not to say that this year those bills may not make another appearance. And this is like, well, basically they call it the Forever Chemicals Act, right?
Right.
Can you
Yep.
substitute something for PFAS, or, with state contracts, they want to limit products that use PFAS. So it's kind of, I think if the best word to use, probably stalled at the moment, just to see. But I know that, it'll be interesting to see, what the feds do with PFAS, and then what the states do with PFAS. So stay tuned for that one.
Right. And you still have, I mean, again, you have the two sides to that, because one, you have the user side, and two, you have the remediation side. And I think we've seen at DEP that, they've taken, the hard stance relative to investigation. And if you're finding it, you're monitoring your delineation, remediation, some of the strictest standards in the country right now, as far as that goes. So, the remediation side, I think they've already, gone maybe farther than, and I think we've talked about this at the last seminar we did last year. Why are you so far down the road with the science not there yet?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't think they really listened or answered the question, but I guess, that kind of takes us into, DEP and where we are. And, as we talk about that, I mean, Commissioner LaTourette in his last year, there's a lot of rumors out there he'd like to be commissioner for life. I guess, where do you see, and I know, we have A901, we have a remediation package of rules that are out there. We haven't seen the groundwater quality standards in the New Jersey Register yet been promulgated. That's got to be sometime in the next 3 weeks. So if we jump into DEP real quick, where do you see us this year with that?
Yeah, full house, right? You just
Yep.
teed up a bunch. I'll start with the Site Remediation Reform Act amendments. Kind enough to give us an extension. Comments are due by the end of this month. I know people are working on them. Hopefully we'll generate some draft comments. Right, what were some of the issues? I think the one issue that surfaced to the top was the due diligence issue. If you're a party that comes across contamination, are you responsible? I know, again, we made a pitch to the commissioner in December about why that could be a problem. And then there's other issues about historic fill and permits, and, so I think, just the SARA amendments, we'll see what happens. And again, going back to what happens in the last year of an administration, these are all legacy issues. These are all things that they probably want to make sure they get done before they leave office. So, whether or not we get a lot of extensions on other rules, I don't know, but you have SARA out there. You have something called the Resilient Environment Landscapes, right? The REAL rule. Very complex, 1,000 pages, deals with flooding, deals with a lot of real estate land use. That's out there. Phil, you mentioned the groundwater standards. We all thought they would go final this month. Maybe they do, right? Order of magnitude, some parameters changed by an order of magnitude. Surface water quality standards are probably coming out. The one that I'm closest to is this dirty dirt that we were told is going to come out next Monday. and the
Yep.
register. We've been waiting a long time for this one. And if I could just spend a couple of minutes on this one, because I think
And just a question for you, and I think it's funny because they did say it's going to come out on the 20th. Um, the 20th is actually a holiday. I didn't actually think there was a register on the 20th, but we'll see how that plays. I thought it was a funny date for them to
that's true
throw out
too.
there.
Yeah. So
You
maybe it
know,
comes out Tuesday. Yeah.
yeah, I just thought it was funny that they flagged on that. But yeah, I mean, and I want you to talk about this because this is far reaching,
Right.
of course, through many industries. And I still think that there are people who just don't think it's applicable to them and really think, and again, we haven't seen the rules yet, so we don't know where the department is. But in just the meetings we've had, I mean, from landscapers to pool companies to consultants being different to LSRPs to engineers. I mean, this is vast on how this
Yeah.
could affect.
Yeah. And I think it's probably a good time,
Yeah,
good to have a refresher because it's been so long, right? This is something, this was a public law that was signed right before COVID 2019. Before that, this all stemmed from a state commission of investigation report during Sandy. A lot of contaminated soil unfortunately made it into places shouldn't have happened. They realized that some of these companies that were doing it had probably criminal backgrounds. So there was a bunch of hearings, took 2 years to get to the law. The intent of the law, just the A901, just like it is on solid waste, is to assure that there's nobody in organized crime that handles this type of material, right? If you go back to the A901 law, Senator Lesniak was I guess the creator of it, and it was literally A901. I think was the Assembly bill. In the 80s, I think, or 90s, I forget. It's been working well. So I guess, Phil, what they wanted to do was apply that logic to soil. The
yep,
problem is when you read the details in the legislation, they expanded to, hey, by the way, not only if you're hauling it, disposing of it, but if not, you're brokering it, if you're selling it, basically, if you're touching it, who requires that A901, right? So we spent the better part of 2 years after COVID,
yes,
when the executive order to kind of freeze everything kind of went away, to say, wait a minute, we need more time. By the way, you're actually telling everybody to submit their A901s before the regulations come out. So again, to the DEP's credit, to the governor's credit, we shepherded through a law that basically said everything gets delayed until the rules come out. So here it is. Next week, the rules come out, right? The details, details, details. To your point, Phil, who gets in, who gets out? The problem is, if you think about where this is kind of migrated to, it's not about regulating contaminated dirt, about, okay, is the dirt contaminated? What's the level of it, right? Because there's going to be a certification. If you think, and again, I want to be careful, you can't use the word clean fill. It's unrestricted or non-restricted soil, right? So you got to put them into those buckets, right? And explain like, okay, if you think you're de minimis and if you think you're unrestricted, you certify, you sample, you keep records of it. It's wrought with some issues because what happens when soil changes hand? How can you prove it? If there is a situation, which I'm sure there will be, where something was put somewhere that shouldn't have been, how do you track the records, right? So there's that complexity to it. There's the complexity, like you said, pool companies and landscapers. Now I guess the commissioner during our meeting said, look, we don't want to go after those kind of folks, but it goes back to then the clarity in the rules, what's going to look like. Because again, you're regulating the entity that's handling it. Our position has always been, keep it simple. It's you hire an A901 to haul it. You hire the A901 to make sure it goes to the right facility, and don't start burdening, I know LSRPs are exempt, but don't start putting now these requirements on companies to get an A901 license that could take 2 years.
right.
And
And we also, I mean, I don't want to jump in, but I mean, LSRPs we're told are going to be exempt.
yeah,
Okay. But like I'm an LSRP, I own my own company. I have three other LSRPs, and then I have a staff. There are companies that have 30 LSRPs. They're not owners of the company. You know, how does that to differentiate between the engineers who own the company, vice versa, on how this is going to play out and how does all that work? And then you also have the beginning, there was a registration, get your application in by this date. So now if the rules come out and you didn't register because you thought it was going to be something else, are you now out of luck? You
yeah,
know,
all good questions, Phil. And I know, be rest assured, we'll lead a coalition, we'll develop comments. look, again, every time I see the Senator Smith, he'll ask me, how's Dirty Dirt doing, Tony? And I'm like, still waiting on the roll. I mean, it's hard to believe, right? 4 years have gone by, right? 2 years have gone
Yeah.
by. So, look, now it's time to look at them, review them. And, I've been pretty transparent with the DEP that if we need to go back and do some legislative amendments, we should, because again, you want to avoid, because if you're not familiar with the A901 license, you got to disclose everything for the past 5 or 6 years. Even if your spouse is not involved in a business, you got to disclose it,
Yep.
family members, and you got to provide all this documentation. And by the way, the state police involved, the division of, Department of Law and Public Safety. So it's not just the DEP. Been told it could take 2 years.
Right. It's a big process. We know that I think there was one of our members of the coalition who went through it, cost like $25,000,
Yeah.
attorney fees to go through the process. And yeah, it's basically, excuse the phrase, a colonoscopy of everything that's gone on in your life. If you're divorced, you got a couple of this and that. They're interviewing people, and it's a big background check as to how it plays out. But then, that's even before the implementation
Yeah.
once you get that license and how you're going to comply to that. And, I kind of brought in there, I mean, landscapers, pool companies, if you're moving soil, the definition of a broker versus, I mean, there are so many dynamics. And as we sit here on the 16th of January with possibly it hitting Monday or Tuesday, there's no answers.
Yeah, and don't forget the utilities too. I know when I talked to our
Oh, that's
utility
right.
members, with the beneficial use determination, the BUD, they tried to fix it. I heard maybe that it just didn't work out. So they're concerned because they move a lot of soil. What does that mean to them? So yeah, I think it's to your point, Phil, I think it's going to hit more companies than they think. And again, that's why we got to be good shepherds here, and we got to be detailed in our response, testify, keep the legislature informed, go back to DEP, see if we can work with the commissioner. I'm sure they'll give us 60, 90 days to comment, but it's going to
Well,
keep us busy for the next 2 months.
right. And just to clarify this, it hits on Tuesday, we're done. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is a proposal. I take it back. Sorry. This is the proposal. And so
Yeah.
that brings me to the question. I made a quick note here. So we have the SRP proposal right now for the rules package from Sarah 2.0, we'll call it. We'll have the 8901. Okay. And unless there's a fast track in place, the implementation and the final outcome will be post the Murphy administration. In
Right.
just your experience, I mean, does a change of leadership, depending upon what it is, does it stop it? Is there a possibility of change, help, hurt the process? What have you seen historically on when you have these very important rules that carry from one administration to the other? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, it's okay. It's a fair question. And when I go back through, my experience, I think it's a mixed bag because depending on how complicated the issue is or controversial, they may, I'm sure whoever the governor is, right, he or she's going to say, the new governor, they're going to look at everything, right? They're going to put together a transition team and say, what works, what doesn't work, what do you guys care about, what don't you care about? And the issue of dirty dirt, Phil, if you do the math, it comes out, we got to get comments in, say we get 60 days, right? February, March, April.
Yep.
I could see them, turning this around, getting it in place before January. And I could see, because I think the way the legislation that extended it said, I think you have either 30 to 60 days after the enactment of the rules, promulgation to get your license in. So this is one where I wouldn't be surprised if we try to work out a solution before Governor Murphy leaves office. But, in terms of who's coming in, I know we're going to talk about the governor's race, but it's in my experience, it depends on the complexity of the issue, but they tend to leave things in place and maybe fix it later, right? In their administration, whether it's the first, second year. But all these things will be put on the table. As somebody once told me, that's why they made amendments, right? It's
Right.
one of those things where, something doesn't work, we could always try to fix it. And that's why I think dirty dirt is one where the intent was there, right? But we all know that bad actors are going to do what bad actors are going to do. This is not going to prevent somebody from, doing things in a manner that's really not appropriate. But we don't want to punish everybody else in the process. So,
Well, we usually tend to. But I want to
right.
jump into something you touched. We'll stay on DEP right now. But so the groundwater quality standards, whether it's next week also, this could be the largest uh, New Jersey Register in history, or whenever it comes out, it's sometime soon because it's a year since it closed its
Yeah.
comment period.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask a specific question on this because we do have some change. We know vinyl chloride, we have an order of magnitude change. There's some things in there that will change. In that rule, it does say upon adoption, it changes the cleanup standards in New Jersey, the site remediation standards. Do we have any confirmation on the phase-in period? Because this is not part of the contaminated site remediation redevelopment program. It is a separate program. So that was a question that was out there. Do you have any idea or any way that we could get to an answer to that so that there could be some peace of mind?
Yeah, I don't have it. I know we talked
Yeah,
about it in December with the commissioner, but he
yeah,
really didn't disclose. He said, wait till the final rule comes out.
yeah,
And look, right, you have two possibilities when the rule goes final, right? And we've been through this before. I'm not a big fan of adjudications. I'm not a big fan of litigate because it takes time, money, and a lot of times the courts usually, look at it through the lens of the DEP. Or you could ask for amendments. Let's change it. Advocate. Let's go in and try to fix it. I think, Phil, the question I have, right, and you're practicing LSRP, is if they do go final, how does that whole process work in terms of opening up cases and how that complicates matters? I mean, I don't know, but you're right. It could be. We were told it was going to come out in January, the final. So, but it was a year ago that, yep, the
yeah,
comments were
yeah.
submitted.
Right.
So,
And the unfortunate part is I think that, and we could talk a little bit about it. I think the institutional knowledge at DEP and those people that we have dealt with for years and years have left over the past 4 to 5 years. There's only a few of them left. I know we're getting a lot of words back that the people that we're dealing with there are just not educated enough and not, being able to, they're just looking at checklists and they're, if it's not, doesn't fit the box, they're not approving things through. So I don't know how that works out because, vinyl chloride is the biggest concern to me because you have sites who've been remediating vinyl chloride as a daughter product, and now it may become the pusher for remediation in the future. So I know
And
Dr.
Council,
Berkowitz has a question.
yeah, no, I mean, I think quite frankly, my biggest concern is and when you implement these new standards and you have not had to address them previously doing a cleanup, if you have a biennial cert, I think you're in trouble. I think that's going to be the biggest deal with these new standards.
And I
yeah,
don't have I don't have an answer as to how many permits are out there, but since the site remediation program is designed to get every site into a permit, it is going to be an issue. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's good.
I guess going back to Phil, like other, things that we got to just stay vigilant on is obviously the dirty dirt, the SARA, the real rules, things that'll come out. I mean, one of the issues that I brought up, that a few members, NRD, natural resource damages or now restoration, right? You're practicing LSRP. There's always that conditional clause in any RAO that this, does not address NRD or, I'm all about, following the money too, right? There's been some settlements. How many funds are out there? Where does the money go? What's the nexus to, how the money is appropriated, to watersheds or to municipalities. I think the commissioner just is putting together his NRD advisory council. I know one of our members submitted his qualifications to be considered. I think so. NRD it should be on everybody's radar in terms of what's going to happen. But that's one of those things, if you've been around long enough to know, right? 20 years ago, it's been around. It kind of peaks and valleys, right? In terms of being front and center. So who knows? Question mark with NRD
And not,
or
and again, transparency, I'm not an attorney, but the Site Remediation Reform Act, when it first came out, kind of extended the time frame on when you can go and NRDs on my sites. I will tell you, I've seen more action on NRD, kind of requests and litigation and things like that in the past probably 18 months than I've seen in probably 6 to 7 years. So I think that is definitely a push and where this administration is going to finish itself out. And I think we've also seen the Attorney General with some outcomes recently on the email blasts and things like that. So I think it is jumped up the priority list as far as that goes. The other thing too, and we don't hear a lot about it, or we still as much as we did before, but environmental justice, how that plays out and how that's affected the permit process. Anything from members of CIANJ, problems, issues, or
No,
anything?
that's a good point, right? It is right now, at least I'm not aware on how any big companies that have been impacted by the EJ rules, or, now in effect. But I'm sure, again, everything will be looked at. I'm trying, well, I don't know if we talked about surface water quality standards, I think are going to come
Right.
out. That's going to come out. I don't know what else he's going to do on the air side, when it comes to energy, climate change. So I think be busy, and I
Yeah.
think we agreed as a coalition, business groups, to go back in the spring, to just hear any updates. But we all
We're
know that
also,
it's going to be a busy year. Sure.
yeah, I mean, on the LSRP side, we're seeing again a bigger push into eco and how that's playing out on remediation projects. And I think we've seen, more, and that'll be determined as to what we see in the standards that come out, what the eco standards are going to be. On the LSRP side, just a quick comment out there. The board lost its chairperson about almost 3 months ago now. When Paul Stoffo went back to the Attorney General's office, and we currently have no replacement. Nobody has been, again, remember, it's the commissioner's the chairperson or designee, and there's been no designee assigned. And
Yeah.
not sure if that's because nobody wants to work with the board. I'll reserve comment on that. Uh, but that's something to me. I mean, when you look at priorities, if it takes 3+ months to try to put somebody in a position, which the LSRP program is a big program here in New Jersey that a lot of has been invested in it, and you can't put a chairperson there. It's a point.
Yeah, but you brought up a point about staff and what's going to happen this year too. We've all seen it, right? People know that their time, right? People might want to stay. It depends on who gets elected. So you may see a lot of key people leave. So it's going to be an interesting year to manage if you're, in the administration, because with the transition and legacy issues and everything else going on, we'll
And
see.
that's administration wide. You'll start seeing possibly
Yeah.
some of the commissioners leave and take other positions, and how all that plays out. But I think at DEP, I think I don't think we're going to see much of a change as
Yeah,
far
it's
as the top layer
interesting, 'cause one of
goes.
the other things that he mentioned in his state of the state on affordable housing is he wants to revise zoning laws and planning laws. And if you know Jeff Tittle from the Sierra Club, I know he kind of pushed back on that in his statement. Um, we're having a real estate event at the end of the month where we have some developers and all the real estate brokerage firms talk about, where's, right, we talk about 2025, commercial, industrial, residential, affordable housing, right? Development with the real rules, with the flooding, nexus to transportation. I mean, it's, just on the real estate side alone, focusing in on what all these rules mean, and what does it mean to development. And many of us on this call probably deal with a lot of development. So again, that's January 31st at Bergen Community College, and we have a great lineup of speakers. But I think, Phil, there's what worries me is, are we going to have the resources, and I'm talking about collectively as the business community, to really thoroughly go through all these proposals in detail? Kind of, it's like a chess game, 3, 4, positions out. What does this mean in practicality? And can we get it fixed before it hits? That's the big challenge. Can we get it fixed before it hits? And obviously, if you know the legislative process, this is what I tell folks all the time. It's great you go meet with senators and assembly people, but at the end of the day, the bill's going to hit the governor's desk, and he could either stamp it, say, looks good, or he could say, no, thanks. So I think you have to, it's a process that you have to just be diligent about. So.
Yeah, and you hit it in the beginning, and not just to put you on the spot a little, and then we'll jump into the governor's race. So you have a lame duck governor. Technically, you have a lame duck assembly. They're all going to be up for re-election this year. I mean, how much do you see historically in years like that, other than just clean up the rules that have been proposed, get them out the door. I mean, do you think we're going to see dramatic, legislation come out of, New Jersey right this year? Or do you think it's going to be, let's clean up what we started and let's move on to our legacy?
Good question, Phil.
I try.
I can assure you, because it's an election for the Assembly, not the Senate. The Assembly's not going to want to do anything controversial, like taxes or anything. I mean, the governor in his last budget, he's hinted to the state budget coming down a little bit, right? So he's asked all the agencies to reduce spending, put together a plan. So I think we'll see between now and June. It's all about the budget. But no, I don't think you see anything controversial. I think these are all the issues that we talked about: PFAS, plastic recycling, a couple other things, some minor things. Like there's one where one of our companies actually built a facility to recycle solar panels. I mean, Senator Smith's got a bill in there to say, yes, they shouldn't be in landfills. I think those smaller issues will go through, but nothing really controversial. But again, the other thing I learned is in Trenton, I could be wrong, right? It all depends on what happens. We have to keep an eye on what happens at the federal level. And I can't stress that enough, because nobody knows, right, what the new administration is going to do and how it impacts the states and what the state's reaction is going to be. So I think there's a lot of unknowns. That could
And
be
it really
good.
makes for people who are political junkies, it makes an interesting dynamic, because you have a Senate that is a New Jersey Senate that's staying, and they want to do whatever they can do to start, finishing up their job, and you have an Assembly who really doesn't want to rock the boat because they're all running for re-election. So, but the question you did mention, the budget. Do you think DEP will see staff go up or down, as a question just came in?
Yeah, a good question. And what I've read and a few people that I've talked to, and again, this is all going to be, and just to explain how the budget works too, and this is fascinating to me. Governor in February says, here's my wish list, my priorities. He's got all the agencies that put together these budgets. And then the legislature goes out on a public tour. Everybody weighs in. Last minute, it seems to be May and June, the budget gets finalized, which I think is really not good, right, in terms of transparency, because you want that back and forth. What's the final? So the answer to the question, I think, if I had to guess, maybe that's going to stay flat or it's going to go down. I don't know, right? It all depends. Here's what I could tell you, because I've looked at it in Treasury. Tax revenues seem to be lining up. There's really no cliff yet, right? I think the governor, and again, depending on what you read, there's been some speculation that we could start seeing a decline. We just don't know. So I think if I had to guess, it's either going to stay flat. I don't see it going up, but I could be wrong. I really don't see it going up.
Yeah, I mean, what we do know is we've seen the numbers. More people left New Jersey over the past 2 years, I think, than 48 states in the country, or whatever it might be, the numbers that came out. We are seeing new people, new names at DEP. I think a lot of them tend to be new hires. We're not seeing elevations of people as far as moving up the ladder at DEP much. They're kind of the same old people that are there. We're also, I mean, again, we're not seeing people at DEP 5 days a week. It's a lot of remote work. Not sure how that is longevity wise for the buildings, the structure, the Trenton in itself. I think is hurt because a lot of people are not back to work as far as goes. Question came in, any discussion about legislation pertaining to insurance coverage for climate related risks, fire and flooding? That's a timely topic.
I heard some discussion about it. We just haven't seen legislation, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see something that's in relation to what's going on in California, unfortunately.
Usually things start in California, so they usually end up coming here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think we will see the change of the Arizona Cardinals stadium name, which I thought was ironic that they moved the it's a State Farm stadium, which I think was a little crazy. Okay, we got if you have questions, please ask them, put them in the chat or raise your hand. But let's jump in. We got 10 minutes left. We have a governor's race. I think other than you and I, everybody else in New Jersey is running. Let's talk. The Republican side is smaller. So why don't we start there?
Sure.
Who do you see making his way to the top? I don't know if we have a woman.
Yeah, I want to say there's like 6 or 7 candidates. Obviously, the big names are Jack Ciattarelli, Bill Spadia
Lady.
from radio, John Bramnick, who's a senator now, personal injury attorney, truck driver Ed Durr, former senator, he's in there, and then I think there's a couple more. So
Yeah.
fascinating, right? So you think about the Republicans, it all depends on, does Donald Trump weigh in? And think about the primary first, and then we can talk about general election. But does Donald Trump weigh in and support one of those candidates, right? John Bramnick on record, not a big Trump guy, so Trump's not going to put his, does Trump put support behind a Bill Spadia, Jack Ciattarelli? And then also, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that those voters will turn out? I think it's going to be a very tight race on the Republican side, but Jack's got the advantage, obviously. He's got the name advantage, and he's got a lot of infrastructure, but it's going to not be easy. But I think, you know, you'll start to see 2 or 3 months from now. By the way, the primary is June 10th.
Right. You got moved. Yep.
Right. It got moved. But I think if I had to guess right now, Phil, obviously, if you were a betting man, you know, Jack's got the lead, but things could change. And as we all know in politics, a day is forever.
Yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes going on. There's talk about teaming and things like that. And keep in mind too, you know, oh my God, his name just escaped me. The gentleman who ran for Senate against Andy Kim, you know, was not the Trump.
Curtis Bashaw.
Curtis Bashaw, yeah, he was not the Trump choice. You know, Trump supported.
By the way, just had this discussion last night with a few of our board members. People don't get the impression that because Trump got 1.9 million votes in New Jersey, that carries over for the governors, because it's a different dynamic.
Different dynamic.
Different dynamic. So I think, like I said earlier at the start, voter turnout's going to be lower. It's going to be a partisan turnout. The thing is, who can get the unaffiliated out and who are they going to vote for? So I think on the Republican side, stacked. You know, the big question is, does Trump come out? I don't know. Does he not? It's a dynamic to watch.
Right. And the other thing too is, what does and you know, again, you're talking about 6 months from now, you know, when the election, you know, the campaign really kicks off, what's the value of Trump? You know, if he, based upon what he does in the first 100 days, 200 days, you know, and what's the value to him for New Jersey? You know, may not be worth much to him by then.
Yeah. So I think going back to the longer everybody stays in, and they've all qualified, I think, for matching funds, state funds.
Yeah.
They have to spend no more than $9 million, I think, during the primary. The harder it is to really get that confidence that I'm in. So the more, if it's 3 or 4 of them, oh boy, you know, buckle up, because I think it's going to be, depends on voter turnout.
Yep.
You know, in the
So let's flip to the Democratic side. We got everybody.
Interesting, because the Democrats have a couple of Steve Fulop, mayor of Jersey City. He's got a lot of money. Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark. Steve Sweeney, former Senate president. You now have Mikey Sherrill, congresswoman. You have Congressman Josh Gottheimer, Sean Spiller, who's the NJDEP president. So I'm up to 6, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody else is going to jump in, but again, the dynamic is similar to the Republicans. Where does that momentum go? You know, does a Mikey Sherrill, you know, Josh Gottheimer being congressional folks to the mayors? Money. And this is what I think is important. Money is not as important as it used to be at the end of the day. It gets complicated. I think politics gets complicated. So it's not just money. It's that momentum. It's your platform. It's, you know, who coalesces around you. You know, I'd say, and I talked to one of our prominent Democratic board members, and he said to me, yes, this was a Monday. He said, Tony, I've been doing this 40 years. If anybody tells you today they know who's going to win, they really don't know what they're talking about. And that's probably the best way to describe it, Phil. What'll be interesting is to watch over the next 2 months where the dynamic is, the momentum shift, who raises more money, who's got more media coverage, you know, and watch to see what happens. But I think, just similar to the Republicans, I think it's going to be tight. The more people that stay in for the primary, it's going to make the primary that much more, you know, nail biter, you know, because people could get out.
Right. And not to go real deep into politics, but, you know, we now have the county line disappear in New Jersey, you know.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think, right. So for everybody that doesn't know, Andy Kim sued for the county lines, and the county bosses, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, get preference on who gets the line, right? So when you go vote, you look at the ballot, it's your eyes go right to the left and or go down, who's Republican, who's not. The Assembly just worked on a ballot redesign initiative. It's going to be fascinating to see, you know, how the ballot looks like and whether or not that's going to be a game changer in the primary. Fast forward, go to the general election. I think whoever survives on June 10th lives to fight on for November 4th, I guess, is the election. The tendency historically is, and again, you know, go back 4 years when Joe Biden, you know, his first year, there was that Republican wave, South Jersey, right? That's how Steve Sweeney got defeated. Jack almost beat Phil Murphy by 84,000 votes. So
Yep.
is there going to be something similar? It all depends on what the Trump administration does the next 8 or 9 months. But I think, you know, what disappoints me, Phil, is at the end of the day that the voter turnout it should be 60, 80 higher, but it won't be. And so we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, I always say if you don't vote, you can't complain, and everybody likes to complain, so you really should come out and vote. But
Yeah.
I do think this county line is going to be interesting. Again, it's not finalized yet. There's no design. You don't know how it's going to be, you know, but the fact that when you go to vote for governor, as opposed to seeing people under different party lines and under different, you know, you're going to just see a straight line. And
Yeah.
it's really going to be whose name got drew out of that hat first and is going to be the top of that tick. I mean, it could be as crazy as that because people who aren't educated into the who's running, they just go in there and they pick the first name that they see or the name that they know. And I know everybody keeps, you know, making fun of me for saying this, but I think, you know, Spiller is somebody to watch because I think he has a lot of money available to him as the president of the NJEA, and we'll see how all that plays out. It's
I think you're right.
interesting.
It goes back to, I guess the takeaway is the longer there's a clustered field, the more anticipation for that primary. But don't be surprised if before June 10th, you know, some folks both on the Republican Democrat side step down, right? Just kind of clear the field. It depends
And
on
if
who's electable, you know.
Yeah. And if anybody on the call knows why the primary got switched from June 3rd to June 10th, you know, I know the answer to the question, and Ray Papperman and George Berkowitz and others should know the answer too. But if you
I
do
do.
know,
I do.
Do you know? You know? What's that?
Jewish holiday on June 3rd.
It's a Jewish holiday. Very good. Do you
Yeah.
know the holiday?
I do not.
It's for those. It's Shavuot. It's actually when the Ten Commandments was handed down. Anyway,
Okay.
there's your religion for today. We bring everything into this call. As we close, Tony, you know, we're all business people, we're LSRPs, environment, attorneys, all these different things. If there was one thing that other than the governor's race, that we needed to watch this year that you think has the most impact on, I'll say our lives, but it could be business, environment. Where do you think that plays out into what we're going to see, New Jersey specific?
Yeah, good question. And we didn't talk about it, Phil, in terms of what's the business climate? What's our members telling me today?
Yeah.
And again, we're fortunate that we represent all the sectors. So I talk to all of them. And the best phrase could come up there, optimistically, well, cautiously optimistic, I guess. But they're still concerned with remote work, believe it or not, 4 years later,
Amen.
and workforce retention, really. So, you know, and one of our board members is higher ed. I think the things that you're going to watch over the next year is what is the work culture going to shift like in terms of, you know, everybody looks at the big ones, right? The big banks, the return to work. You know, I could tell you that it's still a mixed bag. I want to say the majority that, you know, depending on your industry, if you can work remote, a lot of them have that hybrid. But I think, yeah, that's probably a sleeper issue is workforce development. And what happens. So I think, you know, stay tuned for that because we're trying to do more with our higher ed community and all the colleges have struggled, you know, look out for that too. We haven't really talked about that, but, you know, it's that gainful employment thing, right? You pay so much for college, but, you know, Trenton is watching, right? So, you know, what happens, you know, post that.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's going to be interesting how technology continues to change business. And, you know, Wall Street, you know, a lot of people have told me, Tony, people think when the market is up, that's great for the economy. Well, Wall Street's not the economy, right? It's not. It's just one part of it. But supply chain, workforce development, contracts. I could tell you all of our manufacturers are opposed to tariffs because they think it's going to, rightfully so, it's going to raise costs, right? So who knows what the president's going to do with tariffs? But, I think, just don't watch real estates. Our real estate industries are down for the past year, despite the interest rates being cut. It goes back to the affordability issue. It's just, I know I went on a little too long, Phil, but I think, workforce development and work culture is something that a lot of our companies, are still trying to figure out post-COVID.
And by the way, I think you hit number one, because again, 5 years, it will be 5 years outside of the beginning of COVID and everything. I will tell you that remote work is discussed in my office. I only have 10 employees weekly. It is a topic of conversation all the time. And we'll see. I mean, I will tell you, I was in a meeting yesterday. Ocean County Votech has its largest enrollment ever. And so you're seeing students in high school who are pushing towards trades, probably because all they hear about is how you can't afford to go to college.
True,
The next 3 to 5 to 7 years are going to be extremely interesting. I think New Jersey plays a role in that, and whether that's good or bad, I think it's going to affect where we are in the governor's race and where we are in New Jersey.
One last thing,
Go for it.
logistics. Our port goes back and forth, being the largest from Long Beach, I think, California. Warehousing, traffic.
Yeah.
So transportation, I think, is going to eventually rise to the top, and how we move our people and goods and services. And I think at this point, I'm on the road all the time, and I can tell you it's just not sustainable. Traffic is, as many members told me, it's now, Tony, there used to be something called a rush hour. Now it's a rush day because it's all day long, no matter what highway you're on, it's traffic all day long. And at some point, Phil, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So
I had to go to Suffolk County, Long Island on Monday. It took me 3.5 hours. I have no idea where all those people were going. Why are they not going into New York City? What's out on Eastern Long Island? I have no idea what it was. But no, it's true. And I think it's going to affect you. I mean, again, the gas tax went up on January 1st. You're going to continue to see, I mean, the expenses and how much, everything that happens filters down to the customer. And
Phil, you remind me, if I could tell a funny story. One member called me up. It was a Thursday afternoon. I don't know, it was October, and it was 2:00 in the afternoon. And she says to me, "Tony, here it is. I was naive enough to think I could sneak in and return something at Marshall's. There's 15 people on the line, 2:00 on a Thursday afternoon. Go figure."
Yeah. That's probably because there was only one person.
Yeah,
that's because there's
traffic all day long.
That's because there was only one person at the cash register. I mean, we won't get into store customer service.
Yeah.
That's a loss. But I don't know if I see any more questions that came in. Tony, I always enjoy doing this with you. We go way back to your days at DEP and consulting, GES, and everything like that. But no, I appreciate your insight, and I think anybody who's not a member of CIANJ or is a member, I think they get their best bang for their buck, because you're definitely in the face of everybody in Trenton, as well as being able to enunciate everything that you get out there. So I do thank you.
And you know what, Bill? We're actually very proud of the fact that you are now one of our board members. So we're lucky.
I paid you to say that. Thank you.
And obviously George and Jules. So thank you for the opportunity.
Dr. Berkowitz.
Now, I just want to point out a fact, kind of a vignette. We've had a lot of problems dealing with remedial action permits in the environmental community. And going to Tony, knowing that Tony has a lot more clout than us individually, put together a coalition of groups that went into DEP and was able to make some major restructuring of the remedial action permit program. Is it perfect? Is there going to be another iteration? Absolutely. But Tony, thank you for what you do for us. You do a great job for us, and thanks. It's great opportunity to be a member of CINJ and the EBC.
Well, thank you, George. And I enjoy working with everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And again, just a reminder that this is recorded. We will get it up on our website. That's CPESNJ.com, probably within the next 24 hours. Tony gave a plug for his real estate class. Is that, would you say, January 31st?
Real estate event.
What's that?
Real
Event.
What did I
estate
say?
event. Yeah.
What
You
did I
said
say?
Class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Real estate event. What's the date?
January 31st at Bergen Community College. It's on our website. You can go to our website.
CNJ.com, not us. And
.org.
and-
.org.
.org. And everybody else, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Burkers. You say something else?
No.
Nope. We're good. Everybody go out there and make some money. Be careful on the roads because it is
Successful.
crazy.
2025, everybody.
You got it.
Yeah,
Everyone be well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Ray.
Bye.
Thanks, Jules.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.